US Navy pilots encountered something they could not explain. No wings, no visible engine, and yet it moved faster than their jets. The object suddenly stopped, changed direction instantly, then vanished from radar, and the entire encounter was captured by military cameras. This story did not begin with lights in the sky. The first signs came from military radar systems. At the time, the USS Princeton was operating alongside the Nimitz Strike Group. It carried some of the most advanced radar technology in the US Navy. And during training exercises, radar operators began detecting unidentified targets repeatedly. The objects appeared suddenly at extreme altitudes, then moved in ways that made no sense. Military aircraft follow predictable patterns. These objects did not. They changed altitude instantly, turned without warning, vanished from radar, only to reappear moments later. But the strangest detail was their speed. Radar data suggested some of the objects descended from nearly 80,000 feet to sea level within only seconds. None known aircraft could perform maneuvers like that. At first, operators believed the radar system was malfunctioning. It was newly upgraded equipment. That seemed like the most logical explanation. But even after repeated system checks, the objects continued appearing. And there was something even stranger. They did not simply pass through the area. They remained near the fleet, almost as if they were observing it. And from that moment on, military personnel began considering the possibility that this was far beyond a technical error. For days, something strange had been appearing on military radar. At first, no one knew what to make of it. The signals appeared suddenly, then disappeared, then returned again. So eventually, the Navy decided to investigate directly. At the time, 2 Super Hornet pilots were carrying out a routine training mission. Then new orders arrived. Abort the exercise. Proceed immediately to new coordinates. At first, the pilots assumed it would be routine, just another identification mission. But the moment they arrived, something felt wrong. The sky was clear, the ocean was calm, and yet radar insisted something was there. The pilots searched the sky. Nothing. Then one of them looked down. Part of the ocean surface was violently disturbed, white water twisting in circles, as if something enormous had just disappeared beneath the surface. But there were no ships, no submarines, nothing nearby. And then they saw it. A smooth, white object, long, silent, almost featureless. No wings, no exhaust, no visible propulsion, and yet it moved effortlessly. Not like an aircraft, not like anything they had seen before. The pilots turned toward it, and within moments, they realized they were looking at something impossible. The first thing the pilot said was surprisingly simple. It looked like a Tic Tac, smooth, white, long and featureless, almost like a giant piece of candy floating above the ocean. And from that day on, people began calling it the Tic Tac object. But what truly disturbed the pilots was not the way it looked. It was the way it moved. The object did not move like an aircraft. It stopped instantly, then changed direction. No slowdown, no wide turn. And seconds later, it accelerated again. The pilots had never seen anything move like that before. No resistance, no hesitation, no visible propulsion. One moment it was right in front of them. The next, it had already changed position. And then the pilots noticed something even stranger. The object seemed aware of them. Whenever the jets moved closer, the object reacted, keeping distance, adjusting position, almost as if it was watching them back. One of the pilots later described it this way. It reacted like it knew what we were about to do. Then suddenly it disappeared, not into the clouds, not beyond the horizon. It was simply gone. The pilots searched the sky, nothing. And at that moment they realized they could not explain what they had just seen. Only moments after the object disappeared, something even stranger happened. Radar operators aboard the USS Princeton picked it up again. The object had reappeared, but not nearby. This time, it was waiting near a prearranged training point, and that made no sense. The distance between the two locations was enormous. Even fighter jets would have needed time to get there. But somehow, the object had arrived almost instantly, and once again, its movements did not behave like normal aircraft. No sonic boom, no exhaust, no visible propulsion, almost no heat. Nothing about it looked familiar. At first, some personnel searched for a logical explanation. Maybe it belonged to another country, Russian, Chinese. But the more they thought about it, the less believable that explanation became. Because if another nation already possessed technology like this, it would have been far beyond anything the world publicly knew. And there was another disturbing detail. The objects did not appear just once. Radar operators kept seeing them again and again for days. And slowly a different question began spreading through the fleet. What if these objects were not simply passing through the area? What if they were watching them? And from that moment on, the story no longer felt like an ordinary UFO encounter, because now trained military personnel were witnessing something they could not explain. After the encounter, most of what happened remained hidden. The reports stayed classified. The footage circulated only inside military circles. And for years, almost nobody outside the military knew the incident existed. Then, one day, everything changed. A short military video suddenly appeared online, black and white footage, a targeting screen inside a fighter jet, and near the center of the frame, a small object moving in ways that did not look possible. The object did not move normally. Its direction changed instantly. Its speed made no sense. And in the background, the pilots' voices could be heard, confused, shocked, trying to understand what they were looking at. At first, many people assumed the footage was fake, just another video circulating on the internet. But then, something unexpected happened. The US government confirmed the footage was real. That moment changed everything. Because now, the Tic Tac incident was no longer just another UFO story. There was real footage, real radar data, real military witnesses. And suddenly, one question became impossible to ignore. Why had military systems been detecting objects like this for so many years? And if the incident was real, why had it remained hidden for so long? As the years passed, more of the pilots who had witnessed the encounter began speaking publicly. And one thing became clear almost immediately. Their stories matched. They described the same shape, the same movements, the same impossible behavior. And every one of them said the same thing. They had never seen anything like it before. These were not ordinary witnesses. These were Navy pilots, people with thousands of flight hours trained to understand how aircraft move. They understood speed, distance, altitude, and flight behavior. This was their profession. And yet, even they struggled to explain what they had seen. One of the pilots later described the feeling this way: it wasn't fear, it was confusion. Because the object did not simply look advanced, it moved in ways that did not seem possible. And that was the part the pilots could not forget. If what they witnessed was real, then where had it come from? And why had the world never seen technology like it before? As time passed, something else began to change. The US military slowly stopped using the word UFO. Instead, a different term started appearing: UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena. And that change was not accidental. For years, the word UFO had been treated like a joke, something connected to conspiracy theories, television shows, and internet rumors. But encounters like the Tic Tac incident made that harder to ignore. Military radar had tracked the object, pilots had seen it with their own eyes, and official footage existed. At a certain point, the government could no longer dismiss the subject entirely. Investigations continued. Public discussions grew louder. Even Congress eventually began speaking about it openly. But the important question was never whether the government believed in aliens. It was something much simpler. Something unexplained had been officially recorded. And even now, no one has fully explained what happened that day. And at the center of that conversation was the Tic Tac incident. After the Tic Tac encounter, reports connected to the incident began spreading quietly through military channels. Access to certain material was restricted. Some data remained classified. And over time, people connected to the case began hinting at how seriously the incident had been treated internally. One individual later claimed the situation was considered far more serious than most people realize. And that statement raised uncomfortable questions. Because if the encounter had truly been nothing more than a radar malfunction, why had so much information been restricted? Why did reports about classified footage continue appearing, especially regarding the radar data and video recordings? Some sources even suggested that longer footage might still exist, but if those recordings are real, they have never been released publicly. And as the years passed, the silence surrounding the case began to feel stranger than the incident itself. There were very few official explanations, almost no public discussion, and some people began wondering if the reason was simple. Maybe nobody fully understood what had happened. Over time, another possibility started emerging. Maybe the military was never truly afraid of extraterrestrials. Maybe the real concern was something else entirely. Technology that could not be explained. Technology that could not be controlled. Because if something like that really existed, it would challenge far more than a single UFO encounter. It would force people to question how much humanity actually understands about the technology above its own skies. And maybe that is why, even now, the Tic Tac incident still has no clear answer. The Tic Tac incident did not fade away like an old UFO story, because over the years, similar encounters continued happening. More military pilots reported seeing objects they could not explain. Some moved against strong winds without changing direction. Some accelerated instantly. Others appeared clearly on radar systems, while remaining almost invisible to the naked eye. And eventually, the number of reports became too large to ignore. Congressional hearings were held. Military officials began speaking publicly. But even then, no single explanation ever fully made sense. Some people claimed it was a weather balloon. Others said it was radar malfunction or optical illusion, but those explanations never completely matched what the pilots described. The witnesses were too experienced. The radar data was too detailed. And that is why the incident still unsettles people today. Because this was never just about an unidentified object in the sky. It was about trained pilots, military radar, and recorded movements that nobody could fully explain. And even now the same questions remain. What exactly was that object? Why was it there? And if it was not human technology, then what have people really been witnessing all this time? Even now, the Tic Tac incident has never been fully explained. No official answer has ever completely accounted for what happened that day. But one thing has never changed. The encounter was real. Military radar tracked it. Pilots saw it with their own eyes. Cameras recorded it. And even today, those records still have no clear explanation. For a very long time, people believed the skies were understood, that every movement could eventually be measured, explained, predicted. But the Tic Tac incident left behind a far more unsettling possibility. What if the object really moved in ways human technology still cannot reproduce? Then where did it come from? And why did it vanish above the Pacific Ocean without leaving a trace? Even now, objects continue moving through the skies above us. Some are understood, others are not. And maybe that is what makes the Tic Tac incident so difficult to forget. Because perhaps it was never the end of a mystery. Maybe it was only the beginning of one. This story ends here. But in the darkness, stories remain. Will you stay for the next one? Dark Case Hub.